Welcome back, everyone, to what I'm sure is already your new favourite Ninth Age Battle Report YouTube channel. Today I've got another battle report from the Who Let the Doge Out tournament, this time my round 2 game, and I've drawn a Warriors of the Dark Gods army. I'll be straight up, I'll say that this is definitely not the matchup that I wanted, but sometimes that's the way pairings work out. You get a pretty bad matchup and you got to see what you can do with it. My biggest problems was the fact that he's really focused hard on strong single models. So, obviously, the Exalted Herald has the choice at the start of the game to either be better at combat or more of a range damage platform. If he'd chosen, Veil Walker and Grave Calls and the really magic damage focus path that the Herald can, I would have no real choice on how I can catch him and just have to sort of mitigate the damage he can do. But even as a single model in combat, most of my units are going to struggle because we're hitting him on 5 space. The Chosen Lord on the Chimera is doing multi-wounds 3 against my entire army, which is not ideal either. The saving grace on him probably is the fact that my Shaman has the 2-up ward against his weapon, but when he's got multiple wounds, even just failing one ward can be quite dangerous there. The Sorcerer on Dark Chariot is pretty handy, but I wasn't overly worried about what he could do. And then pretty much everything else in this list wasn't too scary, except for when you get down to the 2 Feldrak Elders, who are also really, really difficult for me to deal with. One of the concessions I made in making my list basically so big and have so many different units and stuff is I didn't bring a BSB. I saved those points and I spent them elsewhere. The theory behind not having a BSB here is basically that because I've got the 2 Banners of Discipline, my 2 most important units are getting rerolls against Panic anyway, and once I put my General in one of them, they're auto-passing Panic checks. Anything else I try and play around, and I know that I'm going to fail some Panics, but because it probably won't be those 2 important units, I can probably deal with it, particularly because my Mammoth Hunter, who I often use as a flank guard, is immune to Panic. My game plan is fairly resistant to cascading panics or anything like that, and it's all the little units that can run off that I sort of just take the risk with by not including the BSB. But that does allow me to play a bit wider. Unfortunately, what it does mean is that when I come up against things like strong single models where even ogres who don't usually have many ranks will often be steadfast if they lose a combat, that's where not having a BSB is really troublesome for me. And unfortunately, this is exactly the kind of list that can take advantage of that weakness for me. So I wasn't too confident going in, but depending on how my opponent played, I would sort of try and react, and my idea was basically that I was going to try and mitigate my losses here. Wasn't going to press too hard to get a big win or anything, but hopefully I could keep the score kind of close and the rest of my team might have a better chance in their games, given that I took a pretty bad matchup here. This first picture is of deployment, and my opponent won the roll for sides and chose the bottom. So I deployed everything to try and go first up the top. My thinking was that the hill on the left was going to be quite important for me to get on top of and seize early, because if I let him get the first turn by going, 1-for-1 drops with him and giving him the opportunity to take that, he could actually push up there, and then my position was pretty useless to me. There was no way that I could exert much board control. So what I was hoping was that I could get the Swift Stride Merkvets and I could get the Rockrocks up there, and I could channel most of his units down into the corridor to the right of the house up in my deployment zone. When he deployed the way that he did, countering me, I still thought this was a viable idea. There was a part of me that was a little bit concerned about the fact that even if I took that hill and took that left-hand part, realistically, based on how he deployed, the rest of his army could probably just beat up what I've got over to the right of the house anyway, which started me thinking that maybe my plan wasn't so great to begin with, but it's the plan that I went with. I ended up putting my scraplings over on the hill on the left because I didn't really have anywhere better to put them, and I thought that would sort of solidify the fact that once I got my Oryx and my Merkvets on the hill, and once the trappers had gotten into the ruins, because I had the first turn movement to get there, it would actually be a pretty strong position for me, because he'd be, if you wanted to charge anything with the Feldrak Elder, because of the position that I could put my trappers in, basically he'd be charging through DTs to get to them, DTs for the ruins to get to them, or DTs for the traps at the same time to get to them, and then if he went for a long charge for the Merkvets or the Oryx on the hill, he'd be going through DTs for that, and even just a couple of wounds blinked off him would actually give those units on the hill a decent chance of doing some damage to him. As you can see from my first turn moves, I basically did exactly that. So the scraplings are there just annoying the Feldrak Elder. If he doesn't charge them, I'll still be able to chaff him. If he does charge them, I'll probably run away, but they don't matter that much. And hopefully by charge, if he does charge them, when they flee or even if they hold, doesn't really matter, he'll be out of position and able to be countercharged by the Merkvets or the Rockerix, and then I could take some early dominance over that left-hand side and help the rest of my army by swinging over from that side and threatening from two flanks. On the right-hand side, pretty much my priorities were getting those bruisers out of the forest so that they'd be steadfast if they did fight one of those characters or monsters over on the right, and putting my mercenary veterans in contact with the wall so they could get distracting if they had to fight something. I didn't want to give my opponent too much of a chance to move pretty much everything up, chaff me, and take a lot of board space. So I needed to take a little bit of space for myself, I think, so that later on I had some room to go back to without completely crippling my plans. Unfortunately, in my opponent's turn, things didn't really go to plan for me. So the Feldrak Elder over on the left made a charge, and I think he was 19 away. He needed an 11 on the dice into the mercenary veterans, and he made that, unfortunately. So we can see that over here. He's into them. He didn't take any DTs for the traps, and those Merkvets are in quite a bit of trouble. And my desired strong position over on the left-hand side is really ruined by the fact that the Scraplings fled from the battle shrine. I think it must have caused terror, or I must have had another reason to run them away. Because as you can see, they ended up in a really bad position, chaffing my Rockerux. They might have even fled from a charge from the Feldrak Elder, but not very far, and then had the battle shrine send them on over to the Rockerux, which I think is actually what happened. So I've got an Oryx who's probably going to take out my Merkvets, who are going to be really helpful in controlling that left and hopefully coming around to support the rest of my troops. And not only that, it's blocked off my Oryx on that side, which was a pretty poor way to kick off my opponent's round one. He's pushed fairly hard with the Exalted Herald in the middle. As you can see, he's not too worried about, obviously, the Saber-toothed Tigers or the Bombardiers, and he's out of sight of my Merkvets over there. He did in this game, I didn't mention earlier in the video, but he went with the combat buffs on and hard target on that Exalted Herald, so I'm not so much worried about him sitting back and blasting me away with magic, but it obviously makes him more of a threat in combat. To be honest, I was pretty happy that he took those buffs, because I wasn't really prepared with how I could deal with something that was casting Hellfire and Grave Calls from 18 or 24 inches away. So even though it makes him better in combat, I felt that was probably the only way that I was going to be able to deal with him anyway. And he could do just as much damage from ranged if he took the magic buffs. Over further on the right, we've got the bruises chaffed by 4 remaining hounds. I think I must have shot them or done magic to them to take some wounds down, but they didn't fail their panic. He sent his Feldtrack Elder on the right up pretty aggressively, which I thought was probably unnecessary. Knowing that I was at the disadvantage in this matchup, I don't think I would have played him as aggressively. He's giving the bruisers on the right a flank charge into him, which felt like a fairly 50-50 combat to me, because I get a charge and in the flank, so I'm starting up by 2. He's got 6 attacks hitting me on 3s and winning me on 2s, so he might do 3 or 4 wounds likely. I'll still probably have 7 attacks back at him at strength 6, which means that I probably only need to do 2 or 3 to even draw the combat, or maybe get lucky and win it and force a break test on him. The bruises aren't that important to my plan either, so even if I lose them in my turn, giving him a pivot isn't going to have him threatening anything that he's not already threatening, and getting a few wounds off him is probably worth taking that risk, from my opinion, as a player who's at the disadvantage and needs to take some risks to get himself into the game. So elsewhere on the board, basically, he gave his Chosen Lord on Chimera a reroll to charges off the hill. He moved his troops up to be a little bit more relevant, and then he just kept his alchemy range in a bit more relevant, alchemy mage in a bit more relevant range as well. In my turn 2, I decided not to charge the Warhounds because that would bring me too close to being combo charged by Warriors, Chimera, Chariot, and everything else. I did take the flank charge into the Feldtrack Elder. I moved my Bombardiers up in the middle to block the line of sight from his Exalted Herald. I would get some shots at him. I wasn't expecting to do too much, particularly because he's got the hard target on him and he's got good saves. But that I thought would buy me a little bit of time. I didn't see, I don't think, the Warriors in the middle on the forest. I'm not really sure why. I was probably just a bit too focused on the Herald. Maybe their dark colours had them blending in a bit to me, but I don't think I would have done that movement exactly the same way if I'd known they were... Well, I knew they were there, but when he declared a charge in his next turn with them, and it sort of surprised me, and I'm not really sure how they slipped out of my sight, but I think I could have moved a little bit better with my Bombardiers to take them further away, or at least give them a charge to the front or something, I'm not sure. Over on the left-hand side, you can see that his Elder broke my Merkvets, but they turned around and rallied. My Rockerooks turned around to threaten that Elder, because otherwise he was just going to come down into my backfield and be a world of trouble. And then I'd also charge my Sabertusk into the Battle Shrine. I wasn't really sure how I thought that combat would go. I was confident enough about the fact that the Oryx leadership, because it was a hunter on there, takes their fear down to a leadership 8, which is reasonably manageable. He's got a fairly decent save on it, but I wasn't otherwise seeing the Sabertusks as likely to be very relevant, and I sort of just took a chance here where I haven't found much use for them in my practice games or in my round 1, so I just sort of sent them in to see what they could do. Unfortunately, in the combat, I'm pretty sure they broke and ran away, so they may not have even done a wound. So I think I really just made a poor decision there in throwing them away, but they're sort of a unit that I wasn't really too sure what to do with, so losing them wasn't all that bad for my battle plan anyway. Over in the center, I also moved my Pyromancer over into the Bruisers, because I was seeing how close the Chosen Lord was to them, and knowing that I've got the ward save against him, it was sort of the only chance that I had, if he gets into the Bruisers, of actually being able to beat him. Because if I take a challenge with my Pyromancer, I'm hoping I'd be able to hold on, because I've got a 12 ward against all of his Lord's attacks, and I've got parry, so I'm reasonably confident in being able to tank his. And then the Chimera is hitting me on 4s and wounding me on 4s, so I might take a couple of wounds there, but I was hoping to be able to stay, and then if I can stay, I'd be able to countercharge with the Frost Mammoth into the flank in the next turn and try and hopefully break him on combat res. My bruises in the flank of the Feldrak Elder did better than they should. They only took 2 wounds, and they did a couple of wounds to the Elder himself. So I actually got to force a break test there, but unfortunately he held and wasn't too concerned about that. He did fail to turn around, which let me reform basically just over to the top of the unit because it would take me further away from an overrun path from the knights who I'd blocked off with my kin eater who came on from ambush. In his turn, he sent the Chimera Lord, as I thought, into the bruises with my character in there. He's taken a wound, which I think must be either from my lead belchers shooting at him because he was elevated on the hill so I could see over everything, or potentially from the Frost Mammoth. But I sent some shots into him hoping to do a wound or 2 because he's only got 4, and if I can get a few off, it actually... every wound matters, basically, that I do to him. So my hope there was that my Pyromancer would be able to tank his attacks and the countercharges would win me the day. I wasn't overly confident in my position at this point, but I thought I had better chances to win than I might have based on the list matchup. So I thought that I was doing a fairly decent job of actually keeping myself in the game when I maybe didn't even have a right to be. The Warriors in the middle did charge the flank of my lead belchers, as I said, which, I mean, they have no hope there. And the Exalted Herald just marched down along into the flank of my mercenary veterans because he had no reason to join in that combat himself. I think that was the big thing as well about the fact that not seeing the warrior charge, I sacrificed them basically thinking the Exalted Herald would have to charge me if he wants to get rid of them. And I've blocked his line of sight so he can't charge the Merc Vets at the moment, but those warriors being able to charge sort of ruined that whole plan. So I really don't know what I was thinking there. Nothing overly intelligent, obviously. Further over on the left, his Feldrak Elder charged the mercenary veterans again. They passed their terror, but if I let him get into combat, that would just give him a chance to get off the board. So I decided to flee because at least that means that my hunter would be able to charge him on the next turn after he failed his charge. So while I'd lose 280 points or something for the Merc Vets, I was going to lose them even if he fought them. So I might as well pick up the Feldrak Elder while I was at it. When it got round to combat, unfortunately, my bruisers weren't able to recapture their heroics from the last round, and they lost the Feldrak Elder and ran away. And the Chimera fighting my Pyromancer managed to get a wound through his ward save, and then his Chimera did 4 wounds to me, and I don't have any saves. So my plan really didn't work because as soon as the Pyromancer's dead, I can't win on combat res because he's going to just kill a whole bunch of bruisers. And I did no wounds to him. So I think in the end, potentially the better option there would have been leaving my Pyromancer out of that unit and just taking the chance on the bruisers fighting the Chimera and trying to take him down that way. The next picture I have looks like it's from my opponent's turn 3, so a bit has happened. Over on the left-hand side, my Oryx is taking care of the Elder, and he turned around to be a little bit relevant, and he's now been chaffed by a Battle Shrine. In the center, my Frost Mammoth charged the unit of 15 warriors, basically just trying to pick up any kind of points. There was no point sending him into the flank of the Chimera when it was a losing combat, so I just decided the secondary objective was scoring banners, so I tried to get a couple of them, even though realistically there's probably no hope going on there, because as you can see over on the right hand side of losing the bruises has lost me the lead belchers, so I'm already down by 4. I maybe should have just sent him into the flank of the Chimera and tried to get some points there, but he did manage to break the warriors and run them down, but he's been flank charged by the adept on Chariot for his troubles. You can see that the Merc Vets have been charged in the flank by the Herald. I think what happened there was I think I charged the warriors and they fled and I didn't catch them. And then they've rallied and come back, which is why they're still so close. But when I failed that charge, I left my flank exposed to the Herald, obviously. Thinking back when we were actually doing the Merkvet combat against the Herald, I was surprised by the fact that just through weight of attacks, I felt like I had a decent chance to grind him down. So I think the better option for me there, again, would have just been to back up, show him my front, and try and tank his attacks and just use the fact that I've got 25 attacks or something coming back at him to maybe pose some kind of risk. Because obviously at the moment when I'm flank charged, I'm not really doing anything. But that was a mistake I made, so I've got to live with it from here. Over where the bruisers are fighting, I must have done another wound to the Chimera in my last round against him after the Pyromancer died. I stuck after that despite losing some bodies, and he sent the Feldrak Elder in, who was still only on 2 wounds now. So in this combat, I put the attacks that I could onto his Feldrak Elder, and I think I might have even thrown my champion under the bus against his Lord, because then I'd have one more turn of being steadfast if I killed the Elder, because it counts as 1 rank. Luckily, I did manage to kill the Elder, and I'm pretty sure I stuck for another round of combat against the Lord as well. This next picture is basically the last one that matters. I think it looks like it's from my opponent's turn 4, so I've missed a few pictures in between, but I think we can all sort of tell what's happened. The bruisers obviously died to the remaining attacks from the Chosen Lord. My Frost Mammoth surprisingly managed to beat out that Adept on Chariot, and he's actually survived that combat on 1 wound, which is surprising. My Hunter on Oryx has taken out the Battle Shrine, is now chaffed by the dogs that I did some wounds to and panicked on turn 1, but managed to make it back. And then the Merkvets have just been hit on both sides by his 2 most dangerous models, and basically I was hoping that I might be able to finish off that Chaos Lord, but it was pretty unlikely anyway. And as you can see from the last pick, basically, this is potentially the end of the game. He might have had a chance to finish off the Frost Mammoth by the Warriors or by the Warrior Knights charging in the flank there. I couldn't get anywhere near to his characters, and the only thing that was remaining was my Rockorix, basically. The end result of the game was a 17-3 to my opponent, and while I feel like I gave myself a few chances during the game, I really, as you can tell from the mistakes I was pointing out, I don't think I played all that well. It was a tough matchup to begin with, and I'm not 100% decided that my strategy going into the game was all that solid. I was worried if I deployed all in one side and a bit of a refuse flank that I'd open myself up to be combo charged by the things that I really didn't want to be combo charged by. But in the end, I sort of just, by deploying all wide, the same problems occurred anyway, because I couldn't handle the single models as they were, and I might have been better off exchanging a couple of drops and using my Rockorix as a bit more of a threat to those expensive characters that he's got. That's one of the things my opponent pointed out after the game. He said that as soon as I put my Oryx over on that left-hand side, it made the game a lot easier for him. Because if he was more central, the Chaos Lord and the Exalted Herald obviously need to be a lot more worried about coming too close, because he's fast and he's dangerous. And I think that's probably a fairly good point. I was a little bit too focused on the hill over on the left, and deploying everything so that I could get on top of that and control that area of the board. But realistically, as we saw after he deployed, there was not much value to that. There wasn't really a reason that taking that hill would have mattered anyway. He could have left one Feldrak Elder a little bit further in and even kept the Battle Shrine over close to the rest of his lines, where the Feldrak Elder just doesn't need to worry about what's on the hill. And if I come off it, I would then be in charge range of the Feldrag Elder. So I think I probably could have done that quite a bit better. But then perhaps the best idea would have been to stay wide like that so that I'm not opening myself up to be combo charged too badly, but then just having the Aurochs in the middle, because he really is the biggest stick in my list in a matchup like that, because one-on-one he can beat a lot of those things that are very, very scary for my units. So I think if I played it again, that's something I would definitely change about my strategy. I might even consider being a bit more defensive from the outset, and maybe I shouldn't have moved up at all. I would have been interested to see how the game would go if he hadn't made the 19-inch charge with his Elder on the left. Because I think if he'd failed that charge, the plan to begin with could have worked out where I get my Aurochs or my Merc-Vets into him, clear him out, and then I'm sweeping over from the left flank and threatening things, which would potentially allow me to play more defensive on the right-hand side as well, where I could shuffle away and just take charges to the front, say, and hope that my support gets there in time. But at the end of the day, it was a pretty fun game. My opponent was really nice, and it's just another good learning experience with the list. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening this time, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'll have another one out for you pretty soon.